Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jenny Kirk, and again, we're not up in the loft on Weir Yard, but instead we've come back to the 009 project build that we've had two videos on so far. So I've showed you a really easy way of putting together the baseboards, and then I moved on to the subterranean. I showed you two different techniques to actually do the scenery, one using the Woodland Scenics shaper sheet with plaster, and two using PVA and J-cloth. And of course, underneath all that, we improvised with some scrap polystyrene and also the Woodland Scenics risers. So we've got it all here. It's had nearly a week to dry, and that's one disadvantage of the PVA and J-cloth method, is that you do need to give it a bit of time to dry out. But we've got that now, and you can see that it looks a bit strange. So this is where the next step comes in. In today's episode, what I'm looking to do is to first up complete the ground cover now that J-cloth has all dried out. And we're going to be doing that with filler and poster paint, and then we're going to move on to laying the track and doing the work on the electrics to actually get it up and running. So this is the point where we should hopefully get an actual running model railway. So come with me in association with our sponsor, Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. I'm really looking forward to showing you this build, so come with me. We've got the project layout here, and first up, you remember this, our trusty Tupperware. We cleaned out what's left of that PVA from last time, so we're ready to go and use that again for the next stage. And what I've chosen to use is some really cheap exterior filler powder. Now, you're probably very much aware of the branded names like Polyfiller, but for this job, cheap is just as good and certainly saves you a lot of money. So we're going to be using that, and what I want to do is to add into this mix a little bit of brown paint. So I've got burnt umber here. It was what was available from the same store that I got the filler from, and what this means is that the filler won't come out deathly white. It'll actually come out a shade of brown, which is just what real soil and earth looks like. So the idea behind this is that if you have any little bare spots, like for example that you accidentally miss with the static grass, the ground cover, and they do sometimes happen just in difficult to reach places, it's not going to stick out like a glaring white sore thumb. And it also means that if anything chips, you're not going to get really obvious chips too. So that's what this is about. So first things first, I'm going to open up the filler, and then we're just going to pour out a whole bunch of this. And we get a lot longer before this sets. So let's just, I think we can probably put that full bag in. Yeah. We're going to use a lot, so one full bag later. I'm going to mix it into a paste first using a bit of water. So I've just got some water in the kettle here. It's not been boiled or anything, it's just quite simply, this makes things a little bit easier. And we're just going to start to mix this up just like we did with the plaster when we were doing the shaper sheet. And you need to make sure it's a pretty uniform consistency. And don't forget, get right in down to the corners, because as you can see there, it's still dry. It just needs to mix that up. We'll get all this water used up and then decide if we need to add any more. Once it is all mixed up, then we can add a little bit of that poster paint. And this might take a little while. We've mixed it through to the consistency that we want. Make sure you get right into those corners, because believe me, if you don't, you'll have little pockets of dry powder down there. But we've about got it to where we want it. And I'm going to add in now some of this brown paint. This is burnt umber, but really any water-based brown poster paint should do. There we go. And then we're going to mix that in, and you'll see the colour start to change. And if we need any more, we can add more in. Now, because this is exterior filler and starts out a slightly grey colour, we might be all right without too much of this, but it just makes sure that when it does dry out, we get a slightly more brown colour to it. I'm going to put a little bit more in. It kind of looks like it's not going to mix, and then all of a sudden the whole thing just changes colour slightly. So you can see there we've got almost a raspberry ripple effect. But as we mix that in, there'll just come a point where suddenly, boom, we are there and the colour just suddenly changes. And there we have it. You see the sudden colour change, and I think we are ready to go. Again, get right down into those corners because you'll get some material that just kind of hides down there and doesn't mix in properly. And then I just work it in. You don't want any real ridges, but this again will add strength to the build as well as giving us a nice firm layer for the ground cover that we're not going to get any semblance of this J-cloth pattern coming through. And we get a lot more time using this than we would with the plaster, so you're not quite on the clock so much. But again, don't take too long because it will eventually start to go off, but you can kind of work it where you want things to go. Make sure it's not too thick, not too thin. And if there's any little hollows that you think don't work, now's your chance to fill those in and just smooth over any ridges where the J-cloth rode up whilst it was drying. Once we get the basic layer on here, actually sometimes it's better just to work directly with your fingers, and you can get a nice smooth layer that follows the contours better, and you don't end up with almost like furrows and ridges caused by the spatula. So I'm going to get stuck in there now. I'm going to get that done, and then we'll come back and look at the finished product. It didn't really take too long. This job is actually quite therapeutic because you can see the layout transform before your eyes, and it goes from that weird blue landscape with the check pattern to the actual, you could imagine this as being the earth, like the layout has been sculpted out of a mound of ground. And we're now just going to let this dry. It'll harden off. It'll give a lot of extra strength to the scenery as well, and it'll give us that good firm base to be able to build up the scenery. But whilst that's drying, we're going to move on next to getting the track down and doing the electrics, and then it really will transform into a working model layout. We're back here. It's a couple of days actually it's been. We're giving it 2 days just to dry off really, really well. And you can see it's changed colour. It's gone a lot lighter. Now there are a couple of bits where you can still see the darkness where it's still drying out, but they're not on the track bed. So I'm going to push on and start work on the track laying next. Now this is going to be bundled in with doing the electrics. The electrics are going to be ever so simple. The whole point of this is to just keep it pretty much as 2 wires running to a controller. You know, it's that mythical nature of DCC that, oh, you only need 2 wires. Well, there's going to be a bit more going on underneath, but as far as the person on the outside will see, you're just connecting 2 wires to a controller, and that's all you need. So we're going to be going DCC point control, and what I've picked up is the ADS 2SX from DCC Concepts, and this is a point controller, and it does the full thing on DCC. So it'll flick solenoid point motors. Now we've got the twist lock Pico point motors underneath here. It will also change the frog polarity, which is something that we need for super reliable running, and there are actually other outputs as well to enable this to flick other accessories. So for example, you could connect it up to a shuttle module, signals, so that they would change and effectively be interlocked with the points. We're not going to use all of those functions, but we're certainly going to use the change in the frog polarity. Now it's the first time I've ever done DCC controlled points, so this will be a learning curve for me as well as you guys. So we're going to put that to one side. And then also, I think the very first job, you remember here that what we did was we left a little bare patch where you can see the risers, and it might have looked a little bit strange, but actually there is a method to my madness. I've already mounted a point motor underneath a piece of wood to give everything some stability and strength to the underside of the other point that I'm putting in. Now, of course, we've got the point motor there all lined up, all set up. I've got one wire in. I had one of the Pico wiring loom wires. For some reason I can't find the other two, but that's a handy way of giving me the common return. I'm going to wire in the other two wires, give myself a bit of length, and I need to cut out the hole so that this will be able to fit in here, and then we can build the loops in between and get the station area up and running. So that's going to be my first job. Once this is in and I'm happy with it, I've then got to line up the rest of the track. We're going to be sticking that down with, I've chosen to use Speed Bond. Now this is in a Ballast Magic bottle, but actually a little tip for you, if you use the Ballast Magic, do keep the bottles because they're perfect for getting the bulk bottles of the Speed Bond and then decanting them on into these. So I'm going to be using this. It's kind of like a very fast acting PVA glue, and I have used it in the past when we filmed GMRC to stick track down, and we were against the clock and it did seem to work out just fine. So that's what I'm going to use for that. The actual filler that we put down on the base of the track just gives a little bit more bite, both for the glue, and I'm going to use a few little track pins as well. Now you can't rely purely on track pins because they will just pull out of this. There's not enough grip, but it will just kind of hold things steady until such times as that Deluxe Materials PVA Speed Bond dries and takes. We've also got to make sure that our alignment puts the track where we want it for going through the tunnel mouths. Now I'm going to loose fit this in here, and afterwards we will build up with some plaster bandage around there just to fill things in, but we've got to make sure that the track from the heel of the point does allow us to get the track through this tunnel mouth and then again on the other side. We've also got to make sure it goes through as well. And before we fasten these in, which will be in a future video, I've also got to put in the inside of the tunnel because you will be able to see through these, and I'm going to put a representation of a kind of rubble walling in there so it doesn't look like you're looking into a world of polystyrene and J-cloth. So let's get on now, and I'm going to set off first up by, in fact actually I need to keep one of these in place just to give me something for the track to aim for. First things first, what I want to do is to get the cutout so this can sit down into the risers, and this is a bit tricky. There's a lot of kind of trial and error. So what I'm going to do is actually I'll turn that upside down so that we can kind of work out the rough size of the piece of wood, because that's all that we're trimming out for, and there's no sense making this hole much bigger than we absolutely need to. So at this stage, that's all we need. So we've got a rough outline here, and it's just simply a case of cutting our way down. Right, this might be a bit tricky. We've got to kind of just lever out the bits that we don't want without causing too much damage to the area around. So I've got down to roughly as deep as I need to go to make space for the wooden insert, but what I need to do now is cut out for the point motor. So I can just see there that all I need to do is to go down further on these two little segments. So again, out with the knife, and we're going to just repeat how we did it before, very carefully. So we've got the hole right down to the baseboard. I'm going to drill a hole down there. I'll actually make it quite a big one so we can get wires through. But just as a test fit, instantly we can see the point fits in and there is nothing obstructing the action of that blade. So there we have it. That little job's done. There'll be a little bit of fettling to do. I'm going to need to just twist this round a little bit. So I'm going to cut out a very small area there. But I've got this now where the point just drops in exactly where I want it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drill that hole in the baseboard, get the wiring put through for the point. So we're then in a position that it's fixed. I'm happy with that. There's some glue in there as well, but we've still got a little bit of movement that we can put in there just to get it in the right place. So what I really want to do, I think the most important is the main line. So I'm a little bit concerned at the moment, but we're going to have slightly too tight a curve here just to match up with the point. So my plan is to get a length of track ready, glued underneath, and then work that back through the tunnel, checking the clearances on the tunnel mouth as well, and just get all that into a final position, a few little track pins just to hold it whilst the glue sets, and then hopefully finally this point will be in the right position. Now I might have to chisel out some of this little bit of a slope here to be able to get the second track round, but actually that track can be tighter, and we'll find that all out as we get in. The main line is the most important. I need that Linton and Barnstaple Manning Wardle to be able to get round, and it's probably the least forgiving on curves. Once I get something like the Small England, that'll go around a tighter curve, so the loop can be reserved for them. But I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to get the next piece of track measured up before the glue sets on this. And I'm also going to, I've cut out some extra pieces of card. This is actually leftover packaging from the Pico twist lock point motor that I've used, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to slip this underneath, and that will bridge some of these gaps that you see around here, so that when we come to ballasting, we're not just going to end up with a black hole that the ballast just disappears down into. I am using some of the Woodland Scenics foam nails just to hold things in place whilst glue sets. So let's just get some glue in here, and again we use the pin just to get it in the right place. Put it through the pre-drilled hole that I've done in the point and just push that in, and that's only going to stay in there whilst that glue dries. Once the glue is dry, we don't need that anymore. I've got the next piece of track here. It's just a 1 yard length of the Pico Flexi track, and this is probably the most tricky bit of the entire build, going through the tunnel. So I'm just going to feed the track through. I'm just going to slowly work that on and use a set of pliers just to pull the rail back in. So that's on. We're in place. And one little trick I've learned is if we just use these to put a very gentle crimp into the fish plates, it just helps hold them in place. I'm going to go all the way through the mountain, and I'm going to just make sure that that's in roughly the right place. And the beauty of this filler is you can just finger push through these track pins. Now the really important bits before I start firmly getting these in position. I've got the tunnel portal. I need to make sure that that track is centered through the middle, which it isn't. Just move it over. I also need to get rid of this little kink that we've got here. So I'm just going to push that over, and I'm going to start pinning. I've pre-drilled the track. It's actually pre-drilled from when we did the test straight onto the baseboards. It's actually been really difficult. Using this method to get the track down is very, very tricky to get it in place and to hold it in place. And what I found is that that layer of filler on the track bed that's covering over the top of those risers brings in many problems, probably more problems than it solves. But I've persevered. I've used that Speed Bond glue, and I've weighted the track down with pretty much anything that I can find that has a weight that'll just hold the track in place overnight whilst that glue dries. It's another day, and we've left all of that glue to dry on the track. That's firm enough that we can get this entire layout up on its side and remove all those black bags that we originally put on the underside, just to stop any of that glue or plaster from making its way through and making a mess. That's done its job, and that only now leaves the wiring to be done. And actually the wiring on this is going to be exceptionally simple. It's not quite 2 wires to the track, but it's getting about as close as it's possible to be to that. We've got the DCC Concept point controller screwed in on the underside of the board out of the way, and I've also started cutting wires to length, and we're going to start working on getting all of this put together, screw into these terminals dead easy. We're going to solder some droppers to the track, also to the frogs for changing the frog polarity. Well, this is the culmination of part 3 of the project. Now, we've got the track all wired up, the points are wired up. It's actually quite simple electrically, but there's still quite a bit of wires underneath, as you saw when I was putting it together. But that's all done now. Now, I've done a test run with my Manning Wardle Helgen 262 locomotive. And of course, if that goes round, anything will go round, because it is quite picky about the radius of the curves. Now, this is just making it round. I had to replace a little bit of track just here, because for some reason the piece of track that was there had kind of twisted and gone very strange. I couldn't repair it, so I had to cut out a load. I've got a new piece of track in there, and it is now working perfectly. So there you have it. Potato Mountain, as people have come to dub this, is right now at the point where we can move on to some of the fun scenery side of things. But that's going to be part 4 of this video series. But I hope you've really enjoyed what we've put together here, and that it's given you a few ideas and maybe given you some confidence to tackle your own project. And what this shows is you don't need a massive amount of space to be able to actually build a continuous run model layout. I think this is the stage you get to where you really start to feel that you've got something special and you can get those trains running. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Stay tuned for part 4, which will be coming in a week or two's time, where we're going to move on to building up the scenery. And also don't forget that you can check us out over on Patreon and help us to make the videos that you want to see on this channel. But it just goes for me, Jenny Kirk, to say thanks again for watching. You stay safe now, happy modelling, and I'll catch you later. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian Smith, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Trish Bits, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, and Dale Williams. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.